Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon. It was really a lot of fun moderating, but we had such a great guest. It might just be my one and only chance to interview somebody like that. And I might not get the car collection that maybe Jay Leno has, but that would be something certainly to aim for, I would imagine. So thank you. It's really, it's been exceptional because through sciVelo, this University of Pittsburgh commercial translation program, we've been able to work at the earliest time point with these ITP teams. And what we're intending to do for you here today, titled Academic Entrepreneurship, Intellectual Property, and Commercial Translation, is to give you some of those insights, to let you peek into how it is that we look at these projects in the context of commercialization. How we're going to do that, it's multidimensional. As you've heard throughout these last 2 days, we're going to do a deeper dive on how we look at the intellectual property perspectives and how those intellectual property perspectives morph into a more comprehensive commercial translation critical path. And my colleague, Dr. Andrew Brown, is going to get into those more specifics. So I'm going to start by really helping to set the stage for academic entrepreneurship and commercial translation. So why is this important, and how does this intersect the Michigan-Pittsburgh Weiss Regenerative Medicine Resource Center? And how we go about doing this. So maybe a bit more theory, and then we'll turn it over to Andrew to talk again about some specific examples using our commercial translation critical path. So let's start by recognizing and appreciating the NIDCR for setting a bold objective for commercial translation in this particular space. We are fortunate to have this level of commitment, and it's certainly been exciting, and it's really an honor to be able to be stewards of helping the science progress to something that might be commercializable one day. We've put some arrows here that capture some of the spirit because, nothing happens without the basic research. These are fundamental tenets, but we do, as part of this resource center, have the primary goal to get great science to commercialization. And so we're here accelerating translation of promising dental, oral, craniofacial, regenerative medicine therapies into the clinic. That's why we're here, based upon the strong science. We heard a lot, especially from Jeannie and the avenues, about the clinical needs. Really, what are those pressing problem statements in the clinic? And how can we potently define those problem statements and intersect those problem statements with well-constructed, sensible, sustainable, and durable market-oriented solutions? So we do that by being very targeted and specific and focused, as we heard from the fireside chat today, and the commercialization of these new tools and technologies. So really a bold vision, and we're grateful for that. Thank you. And so the NIDCR has set and put into practice this bold vision for commercial translation, and increasingly so our universities. Even here at the University of Pittsburgh, it's been around for about 230 plus years. I lost count after a while. So it started with our Chancellor, relatively new Chancellor, Chancellor Pat Gallagher, pictured in the top left. Our Chancellor in 2016 led a bold mission to pull together something called the Plan for Pitt, 5 pillars of excellence for our university. And one of those 5 pillars is dedicated to what we're doing embodied in this resource center, extending the impact of our research through commercial translation. This is application to practice, making stuff that fits unmet market needs, policy development. So we're working here at the School of Medicine on a new promotion and tenure policy for faculty that incorporate commercial translation outcomes like licensing, patents, translational research grants as part of the promotion and tenure track. And commercial translation, the activity of taking that basic research into this exciting journey of commercialization. And so we talked about this briefly during the Scotch and Cigars. You know, commercial translation and academic entrepreneurship. What is this? Well, I submit to you that commercial translation and academic entrepreneurship is really, truly scholarship. Most of you have been here today at this conference and yesterday hearing about the incredible science and clinical research that's moving toward products and services that might one day help patients. So let's think about those three categories of scholarship and link them to commercial translation and academic entrepreneurship. Research. We're expanding these fundamental bodies of knowledge in the dental, oral, craniofacial field and perhaps in other application areas. We're disseminating that body of knowledge. We're advancing broadly these research fields, from basic to applied to translational to industry. And we're not doing this in a vacuum, we're teaching. We're teaching the next generation of scientists. We're systematizing the instruction of this body of knowledge. And we're educating our trainees on these new methods of scientific inquiry and new methods of translational research. The third component part of commercial translation and academic partnership is the commercial translation piece. A lot of us think immediately this is starting a company and going public, which is certainly a wonderful outcome. It's also within the four walls of a university or academic medical center, funding translational research that we otherwise can't fund through traditional mechanisms. So non-traditional funding for this research. We're able to file intellectual property and license out that research and ultimately create these sustainable markets. And, you know, Jeannie from the Avenues said so many insightful things. One of many that came to mind was when she talked about having, as a core differentiator for these research projects in the translational step, a champion that could reach well into the market and also be equally comfortable and facile reaching back into the foundational research. That's what we're doing here with the academic entrepreneurs. So for some of you that may not have been involved in a translational research project and embarked on what we call commercial translation, we'll try to simplify it down into four key component parts. So on the left, we have what's called the invention disclosure. This is when you sort of pull all of your thoughts, all of your preliminary data together, put a stake in the ground and say, aha, you know, I have an idea. And this idea may be an invention that really gets the machinery of a university working so that you can bring together a team to help you reduce to practice your potential invention. And this is new knowledge generation. The next part is the translational research, and we're underway with this right now. We're reviewing the Cycle 2 proposals for the Michigan-Pittsburgh East Regenerative Medicine Resource Center. We funded the first cohort. They're well underway in their second quarter. And real cool, challenging, exciting, transformational research is being done at the fundamental levels with that eye toward commercialization. So we're going to have experimental designs and data interpretation that is linked to how the market would embrace that. Intellectual property. So this is really a partnership with licensing experts, typically at a university with the tech transfer office. And here we're disseminating that knowledge and rendering it in a way that, for example, the US Patent and Trademark Office can ingest and hopefully determine that there's something new and novel here. And finally, in the four quadrants of commercial translation, the licensing of the technology into an incumbent company or into a new company or newco. And again, the underpinning tenets here are generating and disseminating knowledge. You're now linking this intellectual property to use-oriented research and practice. And back to Jeannie's point at the Avenues, this will work and be sustainable and meaningful and valuable if the investigators, the inventors, from these universities can help that technology throughout the entire 4 quadrants and out into the marketplace. You need that continuity. You need that continuity. And throughout, we're accumulating knowledge, we're disseminating knowledge, and we're training and educating graduate students, postdocs, undergrads, junior faculty, even senior faculty. It's a wonderful ecosystem. So here's where we get a little bit more specific. sciVelo, it's a contraction of science and velocity. We innovated a new approach to translational development that is taking that basic research and framing it in a way that will precipitate licensing and new company formation and commercialization. We call this innovation as a discipline. In fact, it's a discipline in and of itself that we are at the cusp of helping to spearhead and refine. What you see here, you could think of this concentric set of wheels as one of the ITP projects. Each project requires an expected set of expertise to get that project from the university, incubate it, advance it, and move it out into the market. The challenge becomes each project has nuance. The patient population, the reimbursement, pricing models, manufacturing, even the fundamental science. So each project requires differentiated expertise to individualize for that project's success. So what you see here represented in blue are the more fundamental translational research subdisciplines to get any one project successfully through to technology transfer. So things like the experimental design might be different for a technology that's going to market than a technology that you might be aiming at the next high-impact peer-reviewed journal. There's differences there in the experimental design. How you even interpret the data from those experiments are different. And certainly, very early on, and Andrew will talk about this more specifically, how we front-load intellectual property, not necessarily development or filing, but the strategic blanketing of how we think about those experiments and what we're reducing to practice and why are we doing it this way versus that way. And the outer ring in green represents the more business-oriented disciplines that really help to envelop these projects from, we've heard about this quite a bit, customer discovery, competitive analysis, IP landscape. This is different than IP strategy. IP strategy is how you're going to take your technology and what's different about that and protectable. IP landscape assessment is what's out there already, what might be blocking you. To business model development, reimbursement, and right here at the top, as we've talked about, the clinical unmet need, the problem statement that really drives all of this. And so this is the sweet spot for commercial translation. It brings together the disciplines of science and business and reduces to practice exceptional science to technologies that can graduate to translational launch. And these are the traditional functions of tech transfer, where they'll file the IP, they'll manage the IP, they'll help with licensing and business development, and even helping to form new companies. And so in supporting this resource center, sciVelo developed a specialized team of scientists and clinicians experienced in both the scientific principles and the commercial translation activity. So Dr. Brown leads this particular initiative, as well as some others for sciVelo. We recruited Dr. Ziegler and Dr. Go to help us with this. And these individuals that join sciVelo, most of them are full-time graduate students, postdocs, residents even, that are so excited about the science and the clinical research. They have such busy lives, but they also have experience with their own commercial translation, and they want to give back and they want to engage like projects. And so the team has grown to over 20 sciVelo experts in translation architecture and in translation development with industry. We have a wonderful cross-section from engineering to dental surgery to neuroscience, some social sciences in here. It's a transdisciplinary team with deep scientific expertise, their own commercial translation expertise. And so when we work with these ITP projects, we're bringing experience, not dated experience, not tacit experience, but real world peer-peer experience to help these faculty investigators succeed with the ITP. And I'll end with, before I turn it over to Dr. Brown, really one of the keys to success besides some of this architecture is the culture. And what is really the motivating factor for not just the faculty, but the teams that support them, to help these projects reach their successful outcomes. And we talked about during the fireside chat with Sam about those value statements and what do we value. We value great science. We value the utility of that science, and we've created a culture to support that. So I promised you mine would be more theoretical. We're going to turn it over to Dr. Brown to get into more specifics to show you now, to show you now one perspective on how we help these projects from IP. But yeah, let me take a few questions, and we'll have questions at the end as well. Yes?
One of the things that you talk about that I learned the hard way is you're interested in developing patents, IP. You can't publish at open disclosure. You have to be very careful to get in a conflict, especially when you're on a human track. You have to publish. At the same time, you don't want public disclosure to maintain your patent rights. Once it becomes public, time clock starts to tick down the road. And you also have conflict of interest in graduate students, because then they can't publish. So you can address that, and that's a dilemma. And a lot of our academic face.
Sure. Wonderful question. It is a serious matter. Taking intellectual property seriously, the benefits of intellectual property, the risks, and even some trade-offs. It turns out that filing that invention disclosure early, like when it's just an idea, especially, will activate your tech transfer office. Here, our Innovation Institute will receive that. So before you do any public disclosure, present your material at a conference, certainly before you publish the material through a journal or any other modality, anything that could disclose enabling information about your potential technology, get involved with your tech transfer office early. They will help you. And what you can do, for example, is if it's meritorious and timely, one can file a provisional patent. There's still a fair amount of work to file a provisional patent, but it's a much lighter load than actually pulling together your full patent application. And that gives you 12 months, to pull together the rest of your data to convert that to a full patent. Then once you do file that provisional, then you are able, within the scope of what you've expressed, to make those public disclosures. The other part is the patents can be boring, they can be interesting. I don't know how many patents any of you have read. I've read many, and that's a form of publication. It's a very respectable form of publication. Approximately 18 months after filing with the USPTO, those patents are published, are made public, whether they're issued or not. Wonderful form of publication. I learned a lot from reading patents. It's painful sometimes, but those are just wonderful perspectives. And on the conflict of interest, we have to manage conflict, and so we don't shy away from it. We lean into it. We really understand, what are we trying to get out of this? What's in it for the grad student? What's in it for the faculty members, the PI, the university? We try to pull all that together. And it's hard work. So we work a lot with conflict of interest management plans. We can manage through it in many cases, not all cases. Yeah, wonderful discussion, wonderful question. We'll have time for questions afterwards. Is there any other question that you'd like to ask before we shift into the intellectual property part? Okay, well, Andrew, come on up.
So thanks, Don. And I'd like to thank Jeannie from the Avenues for kind of setting up this talk very nicely, because I think what we're going to talk about today is some of the tools that we at sciVelo use when a resource center applicant or a resource center funded project team walks through the door and asks us what we can do to help them better develop their translational research projects. And so where we always start with teams is by better understanding, better defining, and I think most importantly, getting on paper their unmet clinical need. So most researchers, of which I am one, will come through the door and start talking about their technology, the science behind it, the approach they're taking to do preclinical testing, which is all great. But as we heard today, and as we know, all of this really needs to be grounded in a very specific unmet clinical need statement. The other way we use this unmet clinical need statement is to begin framing invention disclosures for people that are going down the patent application filing pathway. And what this helps with is helps a licensing manager whose desk this invention disclosure lands on understand that this isn't just a collection of Western blots and PCR data and histology slides that they're looking at, but that the innovation contained in this invention disclosure has the potential for real-world impact. And so we can spend 3 to 30 revisions with investigators seeking other input from clinicians, from market experts, on ensuring that their unmet clinical needs statement is specific, so that it's not just a better bone grafting device or improving bone grafting. It's specific to a population, to a clinical problem, and to a point in time. That investigators are specific about defining how many people are affected by this. It might not be every single patient that walks into an oral surgeon's office to seek out bone grafting. It might just be those with the most significant vertical defects that some new barrier membrane is best suited for. How much money is spent on this problem? Not osteoporosis, but maybe the fragility fractures that underlie that. And how bad are the outcomes associated with this, or how much room is there for improvement versus the current practice? The other part that takes more time is validating this unmet clinical need. So any of us can dig back into clinical and scientific literature, which as researchers we're all pretty good at. But what we know is that a lot of important information isn't contained within articles we can find on PubMed. You really need to go out and talk to clinicians at your university. You need to go even beyond your university to understand how other people practice dentistry or practice medicine. And finally, you can link refining this unmet clinical needs statement to other resource center assets by talking to folks on the Clinical Needs Advisory Board as you're formulating your proposal, or moving down the commercial translation pathway, or working with the Avenues to do some formalized customer discovery. So after we've worked with people to really hone an impactful unmet clinical needs statement, that's when we really start moving on to their solution or their technology, trying to take their even basic scientific research and turn it into a product or a service. And again, we follow this specific quantitative and validated dimensions, trying to be specific about what their technological approach is, that it's not just another bone graft scaffold. What's different about it? What's new? What makes it not just a Me Too device? And how is it differentiated against the gold standard competitor? So not how is it differentiated against an allograft, how is it differentiated against the allograft that most oral surgeons or periodontists turn to in these indications? Another part that we work hard on and that I don't think comes as naturally to a lot of academic investigators is starting to get to a quantitative value proposition. You know, so not just saying that our, you know, our new pulp filling material will make root canal therapy easier and last longer, you know, but what does that translate to in terms of teeth for a patient, in terms of teeth for a dental practice? How many implants could be saved and money saved associated with that by reducing peri-implantitis? And as we heard today, it's not just about the patient and about health outcomes, but how could these innovations potentially save money for a patient or for a provider or for a payer? And how much money might that be? Is it significant enough to offer motivation to adopt a new technology? And again, just like we do with the problem statements, we validate the impact of these solution and differentiation statements. Not just looking at technical validation, is it biocompatible, how does it perform in preclinical models, but how does it fit into the current clinical workflow? Will clinicians be able to use this device? Will it be extremely disruptive to referral patterns? And finally, what I'll talk about in more detail shortly is validating the commercial translation roadmap to get these innovations into clinical practice and hopefully to successful commercialization outcomes. So once we've worked with investigators on specific quantitative and validated unmet clinical need and solution statements, those serve as the groundwork for creating this commercial translation roadmap, a version of which you saw in the funded project presentations yesterday and today. And we built this roadmap to cover several different layers of a project's maturity, starting with one that looks back at historical outcomes. We'll look at milestones during a specific funding period. Maybe it's a seed stage investment, a Series A, or in this case, milestones to be accomplished during resource center funding. And then finally, what else needs to be done to get this innovation to clinical practice and to commercialization outcomes? And we have several dimensions that we look across. How much funding is associated with achieving these milestones? What sort of customer or stakeholder validation has been done, and what were those key findings that helped define other parts of this roadmap? What sort of technology development has been done? How has manufacturing been performed? What pieces of intellectual property have been developed? And based on our understanding of the intellectual property landscape, what other areas could we expand into? What's the regulatory pathway device? What does the regulatory pathway for these therapies look like? And how can we make incremental progress through pre-submission meetings with the regulatory corps assistants and so on? What key team members are there now, and who needs to be added onto the team to help these projects succeed? We can't be experts in everything, as we heard earlier. So when is the right time for a CEO to be recruited into a new company that has expertise raising money? When is the right time to formally bring a regulatory person on board? And I think importantly, or more importantly, for where a lot of our projects are, what sort of training can team members for these funded projects reach out to help them be better practitioners of not just academic research, but of academic commercial translation? So we can work pretty easily with investigators when they come to us on developing the historical path that their technology has taken. But it takes a little more time to figure out specific milestones for a funding round or funding period, like with the Resource Center, and even more work to hypothesize and then validate what the path looks like to the clinic or the market. But we have a lot of the skills necessary to do this on our own, to draft on our own as good researchers, to serve as a starting point for reaching out to experts that we'll work with to validate this. And so looking at where we typically send people to look, it's not PubMed, right? So we can fill in a lot of gaps with scientific literature, with clinical literature. But one of the challenges with published literature, as we all know, is that by the time something's published, you're looking at data that is 1, 2, 3, 10 years old, right? And things change, and they're still powerful for looking at how people have designed experimental studies, whether there might be new intellectual property developing out of different research groups. But there are other areas that are equally valuable to look at, or even more valuable. So sitting at dinner last night, having a discussion with Dr. Steve Little, who is one of the funded projects from the first cohort, he's talking about how a postdoctoral fellow came to him asking why he shouldn't go down this one line of research, and Steve Little said, everybody's done that, it doesn't work. And the postdoc kind of pushed back and said, well, I did a quick literature search. There were things wrong with the science. I did a patent search. Nobody's out there patenting these things. And so I think what a lot of us do is think of conducting an intellectual property landscape search as something you have to do to help support your invention disclosure, or to make an investor happy to tell them that there's not a lot out there. But what we work with investigators on is using a review of the intellectual property landscape to help navigate directions that their research might take. That there's a lot out there that you can learn from patents and patent applications that can help inform your research. And so I think we're all used to doing things like a quick search on Google Patents to see what's out there. But the Google Patents interface has gotten very good at enabling you to see who else is working on similar things, or more importantly, what things aren't people working on. The other thing it's helpful for is finding out who else is playing in your research area. You can look at different search terms like growth factors or cytokines that you're working on, different disease states or substates, and go through thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of patent applications of varying quality to help find things that are similar or white space to grow your innovation to. What a lot of people, I think, don't harness is that Google Patents has many tools, which we could spend hours talking about, but one that's nice is being able to see what other companies and what other research groups are filing lots of intellectual property within some space. You can easily find on Google Patents who's filing patent applications that are mentioning CCL22. So rather than sorting through a lot of junk by maybe some academic research groups or some patent trolls, where I would start looking is what is Genentech up to in CCL22? Maybe they could be a competitor and are putting up walls that our innovation might not be able to navigate around. Maybe they could be strategic partners or acquirers. And finally, and what takes, I think, more time to build a strategy for, is how could we start from some exciting new experimental finding and steer it in a direction that enables us to file many patent applications in many different areas based on white space that other people haven't protected. So that's one way that we help folks develop and refine intellectual property strategies. Another area we work with, since everyone at sciVelo is a researcher, is helping ensure that their translational research plans, their experimental designs, or their data interpretation is oriented not just towards interesting scientific endpoints, but reasonable and sensible regulatory and commercial endpoints. I think what a lot of researchers don't know is that it takes all of 2 minutes, it's as fast as a PubMed search, to find a drug or device that is similar to yours and find out in varying levels of detail, depending on the device especially, but for most drugs, a wealth of data on the preclinical and clinical studies that they perform to seek approval. Not just the size of the patients, for their phase 1 clinical trial, but the specific animal models they used to test their devices, the time points they used, the assessments they used, and how their devices compared to predicate devices they were testing. So you can do a quick search on something like Arrestin to help inform how you plan your local delivery of something to treat or prevent periodontal disease. You can find the medical reviews, you can find information on CMC, PKPD information, a wealth of information with little effort that could greatly impact and make more efficient the way you design studies even before you're thinking about talking to the FDA. And here's just an example for Arrestin, laying out in great detail something that you would spend a lot of time digging through PubMed for to see if and how it was published, on the sample sizes they used for clinical trials, the study design they used, and their key outcome measures. And these are all things that can be incorporated in your experimental design now, instead of doing what I'm prone to do, and I think a lot of us are prone to do, is doing things like picking endpoints of 4, 8, and 16 weeks because they're nice round numbers. Another area we can quickly look at is how to guide funding needed to move a project towards preclinical studies in a GLP fashion, or even clinical studies. And there are free resources out there. One is called Crunchbase, to help define or help find how other companies have done this. So you can do a quick search on periodontal disease or dental bone grafting and find early stage to mid stage companies, the funding amounts that they've raised to get to the point that they're at. And I think importantly for validating your commercial translation path, the investors that they're funding this through. You can find things like press releases for strategic partnerships that they've formed, when those partnerships were formed in their commercial translation pathway, and what those were focused on. So instead of just guessing at components of your commercial translation pathway, you can begin to hypothesize based on similar devices or similar drugs, therapies, what your commercial translation path might look like without getting out from behind your computer. But as we know, just hypothesizing things isn't enough. So you can have the greatest drafted commercial translation roadmap you can come up with, but it's really not worth anything until you've begun validating all of those different dimensions and all of those different time points along this path. So similar to Pitt, which has great internal resources, as well as great federally funded resources like the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program, your home universities and even your regional economic development groups have phenomenal training programs to structure this customer and stakeholder discovery and validation work that you need to do to constantly refine your commercial translation roadmap. Additionally, here within the Resource Center, we have other great assets: Clinical Needs Advisory Board, the Regulatory Corps, sciVelo, the Avenues, and even industry partners that are here in attendance today to begin testing specific parts of your commercial translation roadmap. So I hope I've given a little more insight into not only how sciVelo supports proposals as they come in and evaluates those proposals for their commercial translation strength or potential, but also how we support funded projects in refining their commercial translation pathway. And what I'd like to do, since we have a nice mix of people in the audience, funded project investigators, operating committee and advisory team members, and even members of industry, is to foster some discussion with our last few minutes on, other tools that you use as an academic investigator to draft your roadmap, or where you most struggled and how the cores could better assist you. I think especially from folks who are new to the Resource Center, who are maybe coming at this through more of a market lens, how could the Resource Center better support our team's commercialization and especially how we work on our teams in defining that path to commercialization.
So Andrew, excellent. Hello. Oh, it is. Thank you. So excellent and unbelievable planning tools and help. I wish when I was in school we'd had such an organization. The Horizon contract concept that Jeannie presented is that along the line of once you've done all this work and you've set up a project, there's always only as far as you can see ahead, meaning there is something in every project and the investigators know it and everybody who's analyzed it knows it. It could be don't know how to sterilize. It could be have to put in a controlled delivery system. It could be need funding. It could be have to visit FDA, but there's always a immediate milestone horizon that everybody can see that we know may change the entire project. So my question is, I guess, or suggestion is, with these tools in hand and this wonderful planning, how can we get to a point? How can we get to a point where I'm getting signal. See, I'm getting signal. It's going all the way through.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think you know, maybe more so than companies that are out there, we as academic researchers tend to structure our horizon based on when that grant ends, right? When the money is gone, and that's how we define our milestones. And it might be more sensible for these projects to, you know, flip that around. Maybe that middle section of the commercial translation roadmap isn't necessarily the ITP funding. It's the part of that horizon, you know, window that the ITP funding is supporting. So I think it's different for every project. I mean, we heard from Dave Mooney's group about sterilization issues. And so they set a very good and sensible no-go decision to reevaluate.
Should.
Hi, oh, it works. What we're finding, and right, we have a solution right now, and that we're starting to look and maybe work with K Fuller through the consortium. But it sounds like at some point many of these things are going to get towards the FDA. And for instance, Mishar, or our situation is, which is a similar sort of there, very good about filing the paperwork, getting things there on time, and doing what's necessary. However, I think an area that I'm learning about that is quite important is not just letting that open to chance, and that there is a skill in being able to put together a package in some way that will direct your commercialization thing in a way that would actually maybe be fortuitous for a particular thing. For instance, like whether it's a device, a 510K or something like that. Should that kind of expertise be within the cores in some way, so that you don't have to go necessarily outside to get that? That is a skill, and you can subcontract it, which is what we're maybe doing along with this group. But we're not going to be the only ones where that's going to be the case. With Dr. Moss talked about that too, and one wonders whether or not it's not just a matter of getting to them, but that adjudication about how to do that and what to do and to get there and so on. I think it sounds like an exceedingly important one, because even if you get approved and you get through there, are you going through a 10-year process where someone needs $250 million to do something, or can you find something not there? And I wonder whether or not that's an area that could be expanded if this is to continue that way.
My first experience with the FDA, which was through a pre-submission meeting, we received funding for my project through the Coulter Foundation to support a pre-submission meeting, and met with our regulatory consultant, gave her great data, great sort of information on how we were looking at it for her to prepare our pre-submission package. And she was like, well, this is what you, the research team, do. I'm the regulatory consultant. I help you think through this. And I was like, oh, I thought you just dropped everything off, and FDA came back 60 days later. So I think there is that sort of skill set at the interface between people that are very embedded in the clinical science or translational science and the regulatory experts. And I don't have an answer for your question of how best to handle that, but I agree that I, from my own experience and working with other teams, do realize that it might not be a handoff like a lot of people think it is or think it should be.
Well, I think we'll have to move on to the next presentation, so if everybody wants to leave at 3 p.m. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Don. And